For years, no one had stepped foot in that house. Until one night, 7 strangers arrived. The woman opened the door, and in that moment, fate quietly walked in. But why did one of them never leave? By the way, we noticed something small. Most people who watch these stories aren't actually subscribed to the channel. Maybe we get caught up in the moment, or just forget to hit the button. But your support truly helps us keep creating stories like this. If this story moved you, don't forget to like the video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to the channel before the snowstorm began. Loneliness had already piled up on the roof. As Clara Engel's cabin groaned with the wind, the stove inside was burning fiercely, but the cold still crept up to her knees from the corners of the room. Clara watched the swirling snow outside as she warmed her hands around a tin cup. No tea, just some boiled herbs, tasting like salty water. She wasn't chasing flavor anymore. It was the 5th winter, and still, no footsteps. Everything was quiet, but it was the kind of quiet that feels like nature is holding its breath just before breaking the silence. Just like that night. While Clara checked the rotting potatoes in the corner of the kitchen, she suddenly felt it. First, the flame in the stove flickered. Then the shadows on the walls stretched. And finally, the slow but certain knocks on the door. 7 times. Clara froze. In all the years of loneliness that had soaked into her bones, nothing like this had ever happened. The last time that door had opened, a young woman asking for help had been standing there. But now, there was something heavier behind it. She didn't hear footsteps, but her heart already sensed someone's breath. When she opened the door, shapes appeared in the blinding whiteness. 7 men, all tall, dressed in furs hanging to their shoulders, standing in a half-circle around their horses like statues carved from the snow. Their eyes stared steadily from within the shadows. At first, Clara couldn't even think, but then she recognized something in their gaze. Not hunger, not threat, but a tired kind of waiting. One of them stepped forward. He was dressed lighter than the others. As snowflakes melted on his cheekbones, he spoke like thunder muffled under a blanket. "We're looking for shelter." Clara didn't say anything, but she stepped back, leaving the door open. That was answer enough. When they came in, the air shifted. Silence came with them, but it wasn't the kind of silence Clara was used to. This one had weight. It didn't crush thoughts, it brought them to the surface. Without needing instructions, the men took off their boots. One knelt by the stove to warm his hands. Another began untying his snow-covered hair. Clara watched them from the corner of her eye, not in fear, but with an odd kind of attention. These were warriors, but they hadn't come to fight tonight. She added her last handful of beans to a pot of broth and stirred. Without meaning to, she divided it into 7 bowls. The quietest one, the man with the scarred face who had spoken first, took his bowl gently. "Thank you," he said. His face was frozen like snow, but there was warmth in his voice. Their eyes met. For the first time in years, Clara let a sentence leave her lips. "There's room upstairs. And blankets." The man nodded. "We'll sleep on the floor." But the others had already claimed spots. They spoke in soft tones, in different languages, but even their voices respected the silence. Their conversations weren't arguments, they were like prayers. Late into the night, Clara covered each of them with the last blanket she had. For the last one, the scarred man, she gently lowered a quilt from above. As she did, his hand brushed hers. It wasn't a grip, it was a sign of reality. That touch said, "We're here. We're really here." And Clara's heart, that quiet heart of hers, beat faster for the first time in years. Outside, the wind picked up, but inside, the fire kept burning steadily. Maybe for the first time in years, not just to warm the air but to protect a memory. But Clara didn't know yet. That night, it wasn't just people who entered her home, it was an echo from the past. And one of them was close enough to melt the snow inside her. And nothing had even started yet. By morning, the snow was still falling, but the sky no longer looked angry, it looked sleepy. Clara was kneeling by the wood stove, thinking about everything that had happened the night before. As the 7 strangers stirred lightly under the blankets, lying quietly on the wooden floor, it felt like even time was showing them respect. That morning, no one woke up before Clara. It all still felt like a dream, like she'd spent years talking to the walls, only to suddenly host a silent army. But these men didn't mistake silence for loneliness. Their quiet was different, like each of them carried the weight of words unsaid for years. Maybe that's why, for the first time, Clara wanted to believe you could understand someone without saying a word. She tossed the last of the oats into the big turnstile oven and looked outside through the window. Someone was out there. A man, half buried in the snow. Alone, bare-chested. He wore only thick linen pants and moccasins that reached his knees. In his hand, an axe, and he was chopping wood, steadily, without anger, but with purpose. Clara's first thought wasn't anger. She didn't wonder, what's he thinking, coming out here shirtless? No, she felt something inside her start to loosen. Maybe those axe strikes weren't just splitting wood, they were breaking open the shell around her heart, too. She opened the door and stepped outside. The snow came up to her knees. The man didn't turn around, but said, "Morning." His voice was deep like before, but softer now. Clara recognized it. He was the one who had spoken first the night before. A scar ran from his chin to his cheek, but it didn't hold menace, just a hidden past. "You'll freeze," Clara said, trying to swallow the knot in her throat. "No," he said. "Cold keeps a man sharp, keeps him in the right place." For the first time, Clara didn't choose silence. "I'm Clara," she said. "Clara Engel." The man planted the axe into the snow and slowly turned. His eyes were deep like shadows, not quite brown, not quite black, more like darkness itself. "I'm Elias," he said. Elias. He didn't give a last name. Clara didn't ask, but that name settled inside her like a song carried on the snow. Elias. That day, the other 6 men got to work outside. One fixed the barn roof. Another broke the ice over the well. 2 silently rebuilt Clara's fences. None of them waited for orders or asked questions. They did everything like they belonged there, like they'd always belonged there. Elias never let go of the axe. For the first time in her life, Clara's woodshed was packed full. By evening, when Clara handed Elias a cup of tea made from the last of her dried herbs, he pulled a small stone from his pocket. It was handmade, oval gray. A bird of prey was carved into it, a hawk, maybe a falcon. As Clara reached for it, their hands touched. His hand wasn't cold. It wasn't warm either. It was real. "What is this?" she whispered. Elias didn't answer, but he looked at her long and steady. And Clara understood. It wasn't a gift. It was a gesture, a silent promise. That night, everyone laid down in the same places again. But Elias took his place by the door, his back to the cold, his eyes on the dark. Not like a guard, but like a memory. Clara couldn't sleep. As the wind circled the cabin, a storm was growing inside her, too. But not a storm of fear, a storm of change. The way Elias looked at her, it was like being truly seen for the first time. Without judgment, without expectation, just seen. And in that moment, Clara realized something. These men hadn't come just for shelter. One of them was searching for something he didn't own. Maybe a piece stolen from his past. Maybe a bond that belonged in his future. But whatever it was, the loneliness inside Clara had started to crack. And the next morning, it wasn't the snow's silence that broke, but the sound of different footsteps. They woke up on the 3rd morning not to snow, but to silence. But this silence didn't feel familiar. When Clara opened her eyes, she saw that the stove was still burning. The blanket over her had been laid so neatly, it looked like someone had straightened it early in the morning. The presence of the men in the house no longer felt foreign. But that morning, there was a tension hanging in the air. Clara first noticed it in Elias. The door to the house had been opened. Elias was outside, kneeling by the fence, studying the snow-covered ground. The others stood behind him, silently watching. When Clara threw a shawl over her shoulders and stepped outside, she saw Elias kneeling, tracing tracks in the snow. His fingers slowly touched the edge of one mark. Then, without lifting his head, he spoke. 3 people came during the night, watched the area, then went back into the woods. But the tracks are fresh, really fresh. Clara's stomach twisted. An animal? Elias shook his head. Human. Steel-toed boot print. And even if one of them knows how to hide their trail, you can't move in snow without leaving sound. They were looking for something. Or someone. Clara instinctively stepped closer to Elias. She surprised herself. She hadn't meant to do that. When his hand touched her arm, she didn't hide her fear anymore. Their eyes met, and Clara felt a kind of echo inside her. Elias wasn't just reminding her she wasn't alone. He was also showing her something that no longer needed to hide, something born not from fear, but from presence. No one spoke until noon. The men built taller fences around the barn. Elias and Clara checked over the old rifle. It was rusty. Clara hadn't touched the trigger in years. But Elias didn't say anything. He just stayed silent, cleaned the weapon, reloaded it with fresh powder, then handed it to her. "If you have to, use it," he said. Clara's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't look away. "What should I aim at?" "Life," Elias said, "and everything that comes with it." That night, Elias didn't speak. Like most of the time, he was just there, silent. But Clara now understood what that silence was. Not secrecy burden. Full, but gentle. Elias's past was like a pistol hanging on the wall untouched, but always present. Around midnight, the cabin's dog, who had only ever known Clara and never barked at anyone, let out a low growl and looked toward the window. Elias stepped to the door, knelt down, and placed his hand on the dog's head. Then he spoke a word. Quiet, ancient. Clara didn't understand it, but the dog went still immediately and laid its head down. In that moment, Clara realized something. This man wasn't at war with nature. He had made peace with the storm inside himself. Whatever was out there, it wasn't new to him, but it was new to her. Just before dawn, Elias called Clara outside. His eyes looked tired, but his body didn't show a single shiver. As they walked to the edge of the woods, Elias stopped and pointed at the snow. They came back, all three. This time, they stood closer to the fence. One of them crouched down, looked through the window. Clara's throat went dry. "What do we do?" she whispered. The scar on Elias's chin tightened. "We get ready." That whole day, the cabin was reinforced. Extra logs were stacked beneath the windows. Long beams were placed behind the door. Elias repaired the old arrows and bows in Clara's basement. The other men went hunting, but Elias didn't go. He stayed at the cabin. He stayed near Clara, but never in a way that felt intrusive. He was protective, patient, quiet, like her shadow but not a weight. As dinner cooked, Clara watched Elias's face. The firelight made the scar on his face more visible, but it no longer looked frightening. It looked like proof of a past. "Have you ever asked me why I'm alone?" Clara asked suddenly. Elias looked up. "No." "Why not?" "Because I see you're still here." That sentence hit Clara like an arrow, but not with pain like tears. It cleaned something inside her. And at that moment, she understood Elias didn't want to save her. He already believed she could save herself. And that meant he saw her in a way no one else ever had. But peace didn't last long. When night fell, the dog barked again. This time, Elias didn't place his hand on its head. He stood up, picked up his bow, and stepped toward the window. Clara grabbed the rifle. Elias gave her a look. Short, intense, silent. "It's starting," he said. The sounds on the snow behind the door weren't imaginary this time. Elias, gripping his bow tightly, leaned near the window. Clara, despite the fear growing in her chest, tried not to let her hands tremble as she held the rifle. Everything had begun in silence. Now that silence was cracking in front of the approaching shadows. The other 6 men inside were already awake. No one shouted, no one panicked. Each had taken their place as if they'd been waiting for this moment for years. Elias moved toward the door, leaned his back against the wall, and looked at Clara. "This is your home," he said. "You say what needs to be done." Clara took a deep breath. She hadn't carved this land with her hands, but with years. Snow, storms, loneliness, hunger. She'd faced them all alone. But now, for the first time, she wasn't alone. "Whoever they are," she said, "if they came to take something, they'll get their answer." That moment, there was a knock at the door, but not 7 times, just once. Sharp and threatening. Elias stepped closer to the door and lifted his hand to stop the others. "They'll see me," he said quietly, "but I'll speak first." He opened the door slightly. 3 men stood there, their horses still in place, reins loose. The men's eyes were steady, their smiles thin, not from joy, but arrogance. One of them, with a flint stick between his teeth, looked at Elias. "Nice cabin," he said. "Heard there's some fine hospitality here. So we came by." Elias didn't say anything. He just scanned the man with his eyes, then did it again, and then he spoke. "Men who watch in the night, when they come by day, they speak not with words, but with intent." There was a pause. Another man, with short-cut hair and eyes clouded by alcohol, said Clara's name. "Engel, isn't it? Been alone a long time, huh? So now you're not? Looks like you picked the wrong kind of man to break your solitude." The words burned Clara inside, but Elias didn't answer. His eyes stayed locked. The longer the silence lasted, the heavier the tension became. The men began playing with their rifles. That's when Elias spoke. "I can't give you food. I can't give you shelter. But I do have advice. Turn back. This night doesn't belong to you. The third man, the youngest, reached for his weapon. It was a threat. Elias, without raising his bow yet, turned to Clara. Take cover, he said. Everything happened in seconds. The young man lifted his gun, but before he could shoot, Elias drew his bow and let the arrow fly. It grazed the man's shoulder, knocking him off balance. The other two jumped to their horses. Clara raised her rifle. Her hands weren't shaking anymore. If you take one more step, she said, but didn't finish. She didn't need to, because right then, Elias sprang from the snow and took the third man down. As the others hesitated, two more men from the cabin stepped out with bows raised. No arrows flew, but their eyes said everything. The visitors realized they didn't have the numbers. Clara still stood in the doorway. Elias hovered over the man in the snow, not with anger, but with something else, control. He took a breath, then turned. Let them go. That was their first mistake. Let it be their last. Clara nodded, but not just from justice, also from fear, because a part of her still didn't want to fight. She just wanted to believe peace was possible. The men mounted their horses. They said nothing as they left, but their tracks remained in the snow. And Clara knew those footsteps would return, maybe in greater numbers, maybe with worse intentions. Late that night, everyone had gone to sleep, but Clara sat by the window. Elias was there too quiet, awake. You're not here to protect me, Clara said. You're here to stay with me, aren't you? Elias turned to her. There was no smile on his face, but his voice was soft. You're not alone anymore, and neither am I. That night, they both fell asleep in front of the fire, close, but without touching. What they shared wasn't just the storm outside, but something within, a bond fragile, but real. But the snow didn't forget, and by morning, the tracks had returned. Just before sunrise, the sun was rising behind the horizon, but it hadn't yet reached Clara's cabin. The sky was gray, not the gray of a snowstorm, but the gray of decisions. Elias was kneeling at the doorway, examining the tracks that had been cleared of snow. His fingertips followed the shapes without touching the earth. There weren't 3 people last night, he said, without looking at Clara. There were 4. One of them knows how to leave no trace. But one stopped and watched inside. Clara shivered inside. In her hands was the kettle Elias had lit that morning. Steam was still rising from it, but like the water inside, her spirit had pulled back from the boiling point. Were they watching me? She whispered. Elias raised his head. In his eyes, there was no anger, no fear. Only certainty. Yes, you. That day, nothing but silence was spoken inside the cabin. The other 6 men didn't do anything without Clara's permission, but their eyes constantly scanned the surroundings. Those who went hunting returned early. Each came back with full hands, but hard faces. One of them, the older one named Johann, brought Clara a pair of new boots, lined with fur. So you can walk quietly, he said simply. Clara whispered a thank you, but her voice vanished into the air. Elias was building another set of fences beside the barn, this time lower, but thicker. When Clara approached, he stopped. These just for the animals? No, Elias said. When someone sees a fence, they have to bend. A man who bends thinks. If he doesn't make a mistake, at least he slows down. That night, Elias didn't stay inside. He set up a lookout point behind the cabin, between the barn and the woods. When Clara saw it in the morning, the ice inside her didn't melt, it grew harder. Because now she knew, this was the waiting before a fight. For 3 days, nothing happened. But that waiting wore Clara down the most. She had grown used to seeing Elias every morning with frost on his face. She knew he moved through the shadows every night. And every morning, while putting wood in the stove just like he did, she looked at her own hands, cracked, but still capable. On the 5th morning, the tracks came back. But this time, not 4-6 sets of prints. They had circled the area twice. They had leaned over a bush behind the barn and taken a shirt from Clara's clothesline. A message. A silent threat. Elias looked at the clothesline, then turned to Clara. They made the first move. Now it's our turn. What do? We don't wait for them. As Elias made plans with the other 6 men, Clara leaned against the window. And in that moment, she asked herself the question she'd been afraid to ask for years. I'm not alone anymore, but at what cost? Night came with darkness. The sky was clear, and moonlight made the snow shine. Everything was quiet, too quiet. Elias handed Clara a final leather belt. Inside were 2 small daggers. Not in case you need to run, he said. but in case you need to return. Clara looked into his eyes. I'll stay with you. Elias's voice didn't shake. That's why we'll win. That night, the shadows moved. When the 6 men crept quietly toward the cabin, Elias had already seen them. He stopped one near the fence and caught another waiting behind the barn. 4 men remained. Then, someone knocked hard on the door. Elias was there. This time, not with a bow but with a short sword. Clara had taken cover beside the door with her rifle. The voice from outside was sharp. Woman, this house may not be ours, but neither are you anymore. You made your choice. Clara didn't speak, but something inside her answered. This house, this life, this choice, they were all hers. Elias took a step toward the door. You made your choice, he said to the man. And you picked the wrong side. The first shot tore through the silence of the night, but it missed. Elias had already melted into the dark. Clara didn't blink. She pressed the rifle against her chest. Before the second shot came, Elias had struck one man in the knees with an arrow. The others scattered. The other Comanche men came from behind, quietly but with deadly precision. The fight lasted only a few minutes, but every shadow that fell on the snow shattered a little more of the loneliness inside Clara. By morning, Elias returned. There was blood on him, but it wasn't his own. Clara stood at the door, looking at him. Is it over? Elias lowered his head. No, he said, but the first storm has passed. Clara walked toward him. This time, her hands didn't shake. She touched his shoulder. I was scared for you, she said. Elias raised his eyes. I chose to live for you, he said. And in that moment, Clara realized she hadn't just survived. She was alive now. The shadows in the snow had scattered, but their traces remained. Around the house, it was quiet, but that silence now carried weariness, not threat. At first light, Elias sat by the riverbank, his hands dipped into the water. Clara watched him from the window. It felt like he wasn't the same man anymore. As if something inside Elias had either broken or come full circle that night. Clara still didn't know which. The wounded men, the ones who hadn't managed to enter the cabin that night, were put on horses and sent east before sunrise. Elias hadn't killed them. When Clara realized this, she let out a deep breath, because she didn't want more bloodshed either. Even though she knew hate left a mark on every home it entered, Elias wanted this house to carry a different fate. A fight had happened, yes, but victory was measured not in death, but in the preservation of life. That morning, Clara opened her old chest. Inside were things she hadn't touched in years: a pair of hand-knit gloves, a linen tablecloth sewn by her mother, a notebook Henry had left before he died. At the very bottom, she found a small mirror she had long forgotten. The glass was fogged, the edges rusted. She looked at herself. The eyes were still Clara's, but the expression, it was stronger than she'd ever seen. When Elias came in, Clara noticed a small wooden carving in his hand. It was a shape carefully whittled, 2 tree branches twined together in the middle. What's that? Clara asked. Elias spoke without looking away. To remember that the past and future can stand together. Not everyone can do that, but you did. Clara took the shape in her hand. Her fingers traced the carved lines. You did too, she said. The next day, the fence was rebuilt, but this time not for height, for trust. Elias and the 6 remaining men worked together. Clara cooked, but this time not just to fill stomachs. For the first time, the table wasn't quiet, it was joyful. The men had started smiling. When Clara saw that, she didn't quite understand why it lightened her heart so much. Days passed. The ones who left never came back. There were no more footprints around. Just stacks of fresh wood, newly woven fences, washed quilts, and the smell of Clara's fresh bread. One morning, Elias approached Clara. He held a parchment in his hand. On it were markings and a few short sentences. I have to go back, he said. Clara's hands froze. There were no tears in her eyes, but her chest felt heavy. I knew you would, she said. Elias nodded. Not me, us. We have to go back. To the others. To family. To share this safe place. What about me? Elias stepped closer. You're the heart of this home. But if you want, we can carry that heart together. In that moment, Clara realized all those years alone had only been a waiting. And now, that waiting was over. Yes, she whispered. Let's carry it together. Spring came early that year. The snow melted slowly. The earth cracked open, trees began to bud. The river overflowed, but what it carried wasn't just water. It carried away the silence of the past. Elias's 6 traveling companions left the cabin one by one. Each went to a different place, but each one held Clara's hand before leaving, looked into her eyes. All of them had once found warmth in this house, and that warmth had come from Clara's hands. Elias stayed, but he was no longer staying alone. Together, they rebuilt the cabin, but this time, not as a shelter, as a home. One evening, Clara asked Elias, "If you had another life, what would it be like?" Elias didn't answer right away. He looked up at the sky. "If not this," he finally said, "it would be incomplete, because this is the life with you, and this is whole." Clara placed her hand in his. Silence was their language now. But this time, the silence wasn't born from loneliness, it came from completeness. And the wind still blew, but it no longer mourned. It sang. The Yini were just a few steps away from reaching our first 1,000 subscribers, our growing family. From the bottom of our hearts, thank you to everyone who's brought us this far. With your support, we grow stronger with every story. If you haven't subscribed yet, now is the perfect time.